Look at this baby. Built on a mostly matching 1945 date Molot kit. This thing gets all kinds of crazy looks at the range. It's one of the coolest, most aesthetically pleasing pieces in my historical collection. But it was not always this way. This video asks and aims to answer the question, should you do a re-weld? The short answer is that if you need a short answer, then no, you should not do a re-weld. If you need the long story short, you're precisely the sort of person who needs to avoid this area of collecting entirely. It's not for you. Now, I don't say that to be mean or to discourage you. I want you to scratch every itch on your collector bucket list, but having completed this build, I feel some responsibility to give it to you straight. So I'm here today to hopefully give you an accurate idea of what to expect if you choose to go down this re-weld road. And it's kind of a lot. One thing I can pretty much guarantee of any re-weld project you take on is that it won't be quick. This is a time-consuming, frustrating, potentially very expensive niche of historical firearms collecting, and it really may not be right for you. Let me illustrate my point. Let's say this video gets 10,000 views over the next however many months and years. I'd guess that somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 of you would be good candidates to take on a project like a re-weld of a historical firearm. I've done it, and I'm here to tell you it's wrong for almost everyone. And in this video, I'll explain why. Before I do, let's get this out of the way. This video will not tell you how to do a re-weld. This is not an instructional video. It's not a how-to. It's not a build tutorial. This is a philosophical piece on the topic of re-welding historical artifacts and why you might or might not want to undergo such a project. If you want someone to teach you how to put something together, there are lots of great resources out there. And if you want to learn welding and machining techniques, there are much better guys than me to get that stuff from. I'm not the guy to learn welding and machining from. Okay, so what is a re-weld anyway? Seems like a pretty logical place for us to start. In a word, a re-weld is a compromise.
I compromised.
Essentially, a re-weld is a reconstitution of torch-cut scrap metal that used to be a historical firearm. You take these cut-up bits and remake them into something that more or less looks and works to the extent that our laws allow, like it would have 50 or 80 or 100 years ago. A re-weld is better than a display model made of rubber or resin that took no part in World War II or whatever. You can actually take it out to the range and shoot cans with it, and let's be honest, you can LARP with it, but it's not really an MG42 or a PPSH41. It looks like one, it feels like one, it kinda works like one, but make no mistake, a re-weld is a kludged together mock-up of a historical firearm made, yes, from mostly original parts that actually were there in whatever theater of war you have interest in. But this kludged together mock-up has been modified to work from a closed bolt in semi-auto only. So it'll get you some of the experience and most of the look and feel of the real deal at 1/5 or 1/10 the cost of a transferable model. So, of course, what I really wanted was a full magic PPSH41. But the financial reality of the transferable machine gun market is such that most of us can't play. And even if we can maybe play for one machine gun in our entire collection, why the much poorer and much larger class allows itself to have its rights restricted by default due to the pressures exerted upon us by an artificial market created by sketchy 11th hour legislation really does mystify me. Looking at you, Ronnie. Like, machine guns aren't illegal. You just have to be rich, which really does say it all. They hate you for being working class, and they want you disarmed and docile because though they may hate you, they fear you more. Okay, that's gonna be the end of my rant. So of course, I wanted a real transferable Spagen, PPSH 41. I didn't have the 30 or 40 grand that you need to drop on a real transferable PPSH 41, so
I compromised.
Quick note, there are such things as dealer sample or demo Rewelds that do retain the full magic of the originals, but that's not really what I'm talking about here, since those aren't collectibles at all if they were made post-1986. They are the property of the SOT, and they can never be owned by an individual. They can't be taken home overnight. They must be transferred to the ownership of another SOT or destroyed if the SOT ever dissolves. They're out there, and I'm sure they're cool if you're running a machine gun rental business or something, but they aren't yours. And they never will be unless we change our laws somewhat dramatically. They're highly regulated demonstration models ostensibly made for the gun industry. They're not collectibles for collectors, and frankly, I don't find them all that interesting. Okay, so the semi-auto Reweld is an acknowledged compromise. The allure of the semi-auto Reweld looms large in U.S. collector circles, most particularly because America, more than most nations, of course, has a healthy gun culture. And young people, men especially, seem to be increasingly finding it attractive to connect to moments in history that meant something, because our own period in time seems to lack meaning and definition. In a lot of ways, it seems like the world is already built. So what are we supposed to do with our hands and with our hearts? Like, we don't go to space anymore. We don't have great patriotic wars. We've got, like, the Kardashians and Amazon shopping lists. It all seems kind of trivial. I'm reminded that Orwell feared that we would be ruled in the future by misinformation, but what we seem to have now that the future is here is so much information that it's hard to know what matters and what we ought to be paying attention to. Everything seems to be relegated to a sort of gray irrelevance. So many of us long to connect with artifacts from some intersection of space and time that definitively mattered for the future direction of the world. Some critical event characterized by bravery and horror and sacrifice. Some momentous clash of armies that helped to shape the modern world, helped to shape reality as we know it today. This makes sense to me when you look at the ways in which our modern world is organized around instant gratification and consumption and constant stimulation. It's all this hustle and bustle, but without a clear cause. And that leaves many of us with a profound sense of emptiness and a soul-sucking depletion of hope for the future. It reminds me of what Tyler Durden says in Chuck Palahniuk's Fight Club. He says, "We're the middle children of history, man. No purpose or place. We have no great war, no great depression. Our great war is a spiritual war, and our great depression is our lives." If you aren't super careful and extremely intentional with your goals and your worldview and your actions, you are likely to sense that contemporary life seems to lack a clear shape and purpose. Meaning is missing for many, and hopelessness, or much, much worse, bitter resentment can often be the result. And so connecting with the past, even if it's through rose-tinted glasses that are clouded by the myths and lies of nostalgia, it can be a healthy coping mechanism. Now, between faith and education and service to others, chiefly my family and my students, I've found that constructing meaning in an uncertain time is totally doable. But a man needs hobbies, and collecting pieces of history is as good a hobby as any. What's not as doable as constructing meaning in your life, regrettably, is acquiring functional historical artifacts in the firearms space. They're legal so long as you're rich. And this is a persistent problem across the American justice system. This idea of rules for thee but not for me. The NFA of 34 and the GCA of 68 and the 86 Hughes Amendment didn't make machine guns illegal, but it made them accessible only to a handful of comparatively wealthy and powerful people. This in the land of the free, so long as you aren't poor. If you're poor, the government hates you. Somebody should look into this. Ironically, other countries with much stricter general regulations on firearms actually have their heads screwed on a bit straighter as it pertains to historical collectible firearms than we do here in America. For example, in Russia or Sweden, you can legally own a real World War II issued open-bolt PPSH-41 that has simply had its selector permanently welded into the semi-auto position. The cost for these items is very reasonable. These relics are readily available. Lawmakers in these countries recognize that an 80-year-old war relic is not going to be the preferred choice of criminals and madmen. It's a curiosity, a way for military and history enthusiasts to connect with the past in a tangible way. Now, this makes way too much sense. At least that seems to be what the American government and our pseudo-government regulatory agencies who extra-constitutionally make law on a whim seem to think. Just makes too much sense. That's why the semi-auto PPSH-41 is such a rare bird here in the United States, because the government hates you. If you are in America and you don't have 30 to 40 grand to drop on a transferable, but you still want to get your hands on a piece of history like this Spagen here, something iconic that helped bring down fascism, first you have to take that Spagen, that important piece of world history that helped bring down Hitler and the Nazis. First you have to take this important historical artifact and you have to chop it into pieces with a plasma torch, because obviously this is how we should be treating important pieces of military history. After it's cut up into trash, you're allowed to import it into the United States. And that's where this story starts in earnest. In 2022, my wife and I decided that we were in a place in our lives where we could afford to do some collecting. Collecting is different from acquiring pieces for shooting or for protection. We've always had modern stuff for defense and hunting or target shooting or whatever, but collecting is a separate impulse. I have observed that the best collections, the ones I admire most, tend to be curated around some organizing principle. American World War I stuff, Civil War stuff, French stuff, British colonial stuff, whatever your thing is. Because those collections which are curated around a single organizing principle do a better job of telling one story really well, really thoroughly, whereas your hodgepodge collection made up of this and that tells many stories but all poorly. It doesn't manage to tell any of them very thoroughly. At least that's my read on collecting, and I enjoy it more now that my collection is focused. So when it came time to specialize, the choice for me was pretty easy. I've always been captivated by the implements of victory in the East during World War II. Personally, I blame my favorite game when I was younger, World at War, for this preoccupation with old Russian crap, which has cost me more time and money than I really care to remember. That game, which planted the collector seed in my mind, it was really masterful in its ability to make a primarily American audience resonate with the Soviet cause during World War II. You've got Gary Oldman as Sergeant Reznov. You've got this haunting musical score, this sonic hate that propels the player through the campaign, which is one of ruthless revenge against the Nazis. The unflinching and brutal and hideous truth of combat that is depicted in the game without apology, without explanation, and complete with war crimes. They just don't make them like that anymore, and that's a shame. Remaster World at War now. Anyway, we started off with a PU sniper. That was the first piece in our honest-to-goodness historical collection that we were building with a purpose. Then we got a Nagant revolver, then more Mosins, and a non-import 1941 Tula Arsenal TT-33 Tokarev, and it seemed like we were well on our way to building a nice Russo World War II collection, a nice little Russian World War II collection. And then I got this dumb idea. Why don't I grab one of these Russian PPSH-41 kits from Atlantic Firearms for 700 apples? So I did, along with a handful of stick and drum mags. Right away, guys, this project was cursed. Immediately. You've got to trust your gut, and this one felt wrong from the jump. I should have known to bail. When the kit sold to me by Atlantic as numbers matching Russian World War II era came to my porch mismatched and missing pieces. Atlantic was cool about it. They sent me an RMA and swapped it out for a matching kit, but it was a bad omen. And if I knew then what I know now, I probably would have walked away. But I didn't know, and I didn't walk away, and thus began a slow, expensive, painful journey that would eventually result in the mostly working semi-auto Reweld you see here. My wife and I excitedly cleaned up the Cosmoline out on the porch, and we listened to country music, and then I contracted a shop in Idaho, which I won't plug here because there's no reason to, because they're no longer in business. But this shop agreed to handle the semi-auto work and the re-welding services for my kit. The price for the work was quoted at 1,400 apples, and the time frame for completion from receipt was estimated at about a month. This seemed really reasonable to me, so I boxed everything up and sent it to Idaho. This was summer 2022. Me and the builder were able to source an original live, or so we thought, Russian barrel for 340 apples. During testing, this barrel proved to have been taken off of an old European deactivated display gun, which had had holes drilled in it. So some unscrupulous seller or reseller at some point in this thing's history plugged up those holes, ground them smooth, and re-blued the barrel. And eventually it was sold to us as live. During test firing, the plugs blew out and the builder caught some shrapnel in the arms and face. Not cool. And another bad omen. The owner of the shop in Idaho sent me updates with pictures as the receiver got zipped back together and as semi-auto mods were completed. We kept hitting little snags, problems with fitment or parts breaking or parts that were missing, whatever. After all, these are hand-fitted, one-off custom guns. When you get right down to it, you can expect to encounter some trouble, but things seem to be progressing pretty nicely, albeit slowly. By now, we've easily blown that 3 to 4 week timetable for estimated date of completion, and after a few months, life started to happen. First, the builder got sick. Then his father unexpectedly passed away at like 50 years old, which is just a tragic time for him and his family. It's stuff you can't plan for, and it's stuff you really can't be upset about as a customer. You've got to remember that we're all human and we're all trying to get through this thing we call life as best we can. There's nothing to do in a situation like that except sit there and wait and send prayers his way. So that's what I did. And months went by. Eventually, the rifle was sent out to me in March of 2023, according to my memory. I had promptly filed a Form 1 to get the thing SBR'd. I got it to the range with unprecedented excitement. Got my wife situated on the camera to document this most momentous occasion. I charged the bolt, sighted in on a 1/2 scale silhouette, and click. So I repeated my process, got a nice deep breath, pressed the trigger, click. Click, 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 click. This thing didn't work. It didn't really come close to working. I tried every brand and every weight ammo under the sun. 7.62 by 25 and 9mm. Didn't matter. It never ran. The issues it experienced were various and constant. It had light strikes. That was probably the worst of them. Every once in a while, a primer would detonate, but as likely as not, the spent casing wouldn't eject, or the next round in the mag wouldn't feed, or the striker wouldn't reset. It wasn't usable at all. So I sent it back to Idaho. And it came back after about another month with no real improvement. Fewer light strikes, but the thing just battered striking springs to the point that they'd lose their temper or springiness or whatever after a handful of rounds, and the ejection issues were possibly even worse than before. So it goes back to Idaho. It's like May of 2023 now. And by this point, the owner of the shop out there had pretty much decided to dissolve his SOT, sell off his assets, and fold up the shop. I think that the grief of losing his dad and a nasty dose of life stuff coupled with massive frustration, a lot of which was caused by this severely cursed build, kinda killed his enthusiasm for that kind of work. He had a full-time career as well, so I get it. He seemed like a really good guy to me. We've had many good conversations, and I never worried that I was getting scammed or anything. It was just an unfortunate confluence of events, and he kind of lost his appetite for my project and for that kind of work generally. And I have to say, I get it. No, it's not ideal for me in my collecting and shooting life, but there are bigger factors at play, and it's not always about me. This guy had to bury his dad, who was his mentor. He had to close a business that he worked hard to build and which I'm sure he loved at one time. A little empathy here seems prudent, especially since I like this dude personally and because he handled this whole situation honorably and professionally. So now it's August of 2023, about a full year since my wife and I ordered that kit from Atlantic Firearms. And the builder who had pretty much decided to shut things down by then, proposed that the best path forward would be to return the in-progress build along with a full refund. So, yeah, after more than a year, it hadn't quite come together, which was disappointing, but I wasn't out much besides my time and some frustration. Now, the bolt and striker would ultimately prove unusable, but I did have a semi-auto receiver, and the fire control group was also converted to semi-auto, and I had a full refund since the job wasn't finished. I think you probably would have to call that a pretty square deal, and the dream wasn't totally dead. So then it's December or October of 2023, and we've got a decision to make. So I had a conversation with my wife over dinner and a game of Scrabble. As I saw it, there were 3 possible paths for this project. Pathway number 1, divest. Sell the in-progress build for whatever I could get for it and move on to something a lot less frustrating. Pathway number 2, hang it up on the wall as an inert display model. It is quite a looker, a curiosity to discuss with dinner guests or whatever. Pathway number 3, double down. Find another builder or a machine shop and try to see this thing through. At this stage, I was leaning toward divesting of all our Reweld stuff and getting more PU Mosins because those are my favorite to actually shoot. But my wife encouraged me to try and see it through. So we decided to pump more cash into a replacement bolt and buffer plus conversion services with JP Machine in upstate New York. Massive shout out here to Justin at JP. I will link his channel in the video description. If you need bolt or fire control group work done, he's your guy. Don't even bother with anyone else. JP Machine will do it right. And Justin is super kind and extremely helpful. He worked with me over the course of a few months to fit various parts to the geometry of my receiver and fire control group, and he ran compression calculations to figure out how to make me a custom set of striker springs that would work with my rig. He's just an awesome dude and a very competent machinist. Y'all please go and give him some business. It's now February of 2024, and this torch-cut pile of scrap metal has been reborn into a functioning semi-auto Reweld after a lot of trial and error. It took 2 years and 2 builders and 2 bolts and around 10 total shipments to either Idaho or New York, and maybe 20 trips to the gun club, which is an hour drive for me each way. So a very trying, frustrating, time-consuming, expensive process, but it pretty much runs now. It looks super cool. It scratches the World War II submachine gunner itch. It gives me some of the experience and most of the look and feel. And it is made from real World War II issue parts that were actually there in Berlin or whatever. Yes, I am Private Dmitri. I am Sergeant Reznov.
Yeah, that's right.
So, was it worth it? This is tricky. A big part of me wants to say no. But then on the other end, I'm the only guy at the gun club with a mostly real Russian World War II issue PPSH-41. It's the ultimate conversation piece. People see it, they want to come up and talk to me about it. The famed Papa Shah, and it goes bang, and it hits stuff. Let's break worth down, the idea of worth. Was this Reweld project worth the money? Yeah, yeah, I would have to say that this was worth the money. Even if I hadn't gotten a refund from the first builder, the total cost still would have only been about 10% the cost of a transferable model. So worth the money, I'd have to say so. Worth the time? Actually, yeah. I think I could be patient and wait 2 years for something totally awesome that nobody else has. Sure, absolutely. So it's worth the time and it's worth the money. But was it worth the considerable aggravation? No. Definitely no. I would never want to experience the hour-long drives to the range for a dozen failed test fires, the hand-fitting, the sending stuff back and waiting for it to get adjusted or remade, the chasing ghosts in the mechanisms, the having parts fabricated from scratch to overcome whatever unique hurdle we're battling this week, or any of that crap. I would never want to experience any of that again. Now, if I could just send off a kit with a check and get a working Reweld back in 2 years without having to dick around with it ad nauseum, then yeah, I would probably do it again. But the way this one went down, I have to say no. No, I wouldn't want to do this again. But that wasn't really the question. The question and the title of this video is, should you do a Reweld? I'm going to say no, with an asterisk. And here is the asterisk. If you meet all of the following criteria, then you should do a Reweld. Criteria number 1, you must possess patience. Lots of patience. Be prepared for a builder to quote you 90 days to get the job and then take 2 years to hopefully finish it. I've heard this repeatedly from guys who've done it. It's just how this game works. It's slow, tedious, expensive labor. Of course, if you're capable and willing to do the welding and conversion stuff yourself, that's a totally different kettle of fish. You're really only out your time and sweat and the cost of parts, and probably at least some of your sanity. I had my DP with a builder in North Carolina, and they quoted 4 months. 13 months later, they hadn't touched it, and so they cut me a refund. And that's just the way this game goes. That's the way this seems to operate in this space. If I had the equipment and the knowledge to do it myself, might be a different story. Criteria number 2. You should do a Reweld if and only if, this is a big one, only if you have the financial and emotional resources to see a somewhat expensive, unpredictable, and possibly very frustrating project through. This speaks again to patience, but also to your capacity to endure really annoying tedium, because this thing, whatever kit you're sitting on, is probably not going to work right, and it's probably going to require some tuning to get it working right. Criteria number 3. You should do a Reweld if and only if you cannot afford a transferable. If you're sitting on a pile of cash and you can afford to sink the dough into a real machine gun, do that instead. It's a better investment and it's a lot less aggravation because you aren't trying to kludge together some one-off semi-auto mechanism that squeezes itself into the full magic space of an original machine gun while conforming to all of the ATF's BS in order to keep it legal. It's just going to be a lot less headache to get into a transferable if you can afford one. And transferables are the future, I think. My wife and I bid on our first transferable last year. We came in second, but it was cool to be a player at the auction, and for my money, where I am in my current headspace as a collector, I want to say that I am a lot more likely to get a transferable than I am to ever do another Reweld. I really want to say that, but, well, I'll save that news. My final analysis is this. Semi-auto PPSH 41s aren't really commercially available in the United States, and that's not because no one wants them. It's because no one has figured out how to make and market them economically. Rewelds are a potentially frustrating compromise that might be worth it if you're the right kind of guy to take one on. Now, having seen one through, I'm not so sure I am that right kind of guy. I say that, but I did just send my 1944 Russian DP-28 kit, the one that spent 13 months with a builder in North Carolina who never touched it. I just boxed it up and sent it out to Rick Smith at Smith Machine Group today, literally this afternoon, because apparently, despite everything I've said here in this video, I have not learned my lesson. And I am not smart, guys. Okay, so what are you going to do? Well, here's what we should do. We should pressure lawmakers to repeal the NFA and defund the ATF so that this isn't a thing anymore. That's the real correct course of action for us as a community. We should make the concept of a semi-auto re-weld obsolescent. Make real, full magic, historical collectibles accessible to collectors who are not mega rich. Legalize freedom. All right, I hope this video helped you to know just what you're in for before you order that kit from Bowman or Atlantic. Now, nothing I've said here was meant to discourage you. It was only meant to give you an accurate idea of what to expect. I hope you go for it. Go and buy that Bren kit. And I hope everything goes right. And I hope you're done in 2 weeks. Truly, I want that for you. I want beautiful, fulfilling collections that tell an awesome story for all of you. But my experience with the PPSH and with the DP has made me a little hesitant on the Reweld game. I can say from experience that with some persistence, you can get one running, and it will be super cool. But just don't expect smooth sailing from A to Z. You're probably going to hit snags, and I pretty much guarantee you're going to spend more than you thought, and you'll blow whatever deadline you have in mind for the project, probably by at least double. So if all that sounds tolerable to you, get that kit. Make it happen, and I can't wait to see what you create. All right, be kind to the world as you bump into it. Peace, y'all.